An inner child is that part of us that we once were, and we are carrying it with us till the day we die, really. And today we're going to focus on that inner child. What the inner child looks like when it's in its shadow or when it's in its light, and how we work around it, and why does this inner child part has such a big effect in our lives. So yeah, thank you for being here. Another inner part. So we all have an inner child, and I'm sure you heard of this everywhere around in the internet world. They talk about the inner child, or rather the wounded child. And although that is one face of the child, the inner child is so much more than the wounded child. There's other aspects of it that we tend to ignore, and why it's so necessary that we are in clearance or at peace with that part of us, so that we can listen to it and we can it can help us with fulfilling our life's purpose, really. I know that's a bold statement to make, but yes. Okay, so wait, let me get a dolly. So we all have an inner child, an inner person. When I was a little girl, that part of me that responded to my environment is still within me, and it still influenced my adult life, depending on how much I'm aware, right? As children, this is all we have. We have to teach this part of us to respond to the environment, to, for if it was a traumatic or abusive upbringing, we teach or we learn to survive in that environment. And sometimes we carry those tactics and those skills that we have learned to survive with our environment into our adulthood, even though our adulthood environment is very different from our childhood, and we don't necessarily need those skills. We still carry them. And I think everyone kind of could agree with that, because it's such a popular concept in our age now, like I said earlier. But I find that what is normally ignored is the flip side of that inner child, of this wounded child. So, for example, these are two different parts of an inner child. And just a little disclaimer, I want to say that there's more faces, again, to our inner child. Depending on your environment and what your inner child or your inner self had to respond to is what you will develop an inner child of, right? If you were in an abusive environment, you would develop what I would call a warrior inner child, right? Who had to learn how to handle that situation, etc. Okay, but in general, have this example. These are two inner child. So this is the child in the shadow self, which will be the wounded child, the one that had to learn to survive, to come up with tactics, to be a good girl or a good boy, or to whatever, manage a situation. And they had to forget about a big part of them. And basically they had to be an adult as a child, right? To look after their emotional needs, or even worse, to look after their actual physical needs, to make sure they have food, they have a shelter, etc. So this child became an adult inner child, right? So it will be the wounded child. And the opposite of this child, or the opposite of the coin, will be the child or the inner child in the light, right? This will be the playful child, and the one who, would have brought all the joy and played and enjoyed childhood by exploring and adventurous. This inner part of us, it's where our creativity comes from. It's where our imagination comes from, our playful nature comes from. And when we have spent all of our lives, either focus on this one or let this part of our inner child be the one that drives us, or we, for some reason, we're told this part of us is not needed, so we kind of locked it away somewhere, and we don't really tap into this part. We'll find ourselves that we don't use our energy or our creation to its full potential, or we don't access that. And we need that in our careers, we need that in our life to bring forth that growth and to bring forth that playfulness in life, right? Now, the idea, of course, is to absolutely listen to them both, to really not run away from dealing with our wounded child, to dealing with that child that needed security, that needed love, or to be taken care also physically. We have to be able to deal with this child and to be aware and to nurture it now in this state that we're in. So, but to be very cautious and careful that our life is not governed by a 9-year-old who's in a trauma response mode in our life where there's no trauma around, and we're now adults and we're in a different environment and we could handle things in an adult state. Because you don't want to be in a relationship as this is your main lead, right? If your inner child is in a relationship, that's not going to work, because this is a child, shouldn't be in a relationship. And also at work, you can, if your inner child is your one part or your personality that is in front or that is in charge of you, work would not work, because work is not meant for children. And that's where we then come facing with problems, really. But you do want to, obviously, like I said, be very aware of your wounded child and work with that. But also be very aware of the other part of you, this child, that holds in that creativity and that wisdom of playfulness, of childlikeness, really, that can bring that into your life to help you in your creative projects. Because if you tap to your playful nature, you are able to bring creativity and love into your life, like I said. Okay, so if you haven't worked with your wounded child yet, I would suggest that you get some preps, like I always say, like 2 things like this, and maybe one of them can represent your wounded child and the other one can represent your playful child, or that part of you that if you were not in that did come out, because usually this part does come out. It would usually come out when with our friends, maybe rarely, or maybe in school, or maybe in a situation that, the environment is so nourishing that it allows that part of us to come out. So it does come out as we grow. It's just that we never, let it out as much. So grabbing our 2 preps, one of them the wounded child, the other one the playful child, and I would say to you sit with both of them individually in separate days. Let's say today is this one, the next day is this one, and really tap into that energy of that wounded child. And if you haven't worked with the wounded child, you would have to trade really lightly, trade with a professional, maybe, if you have a professional that can help you with that. But because tapping into this can really mean rebringing old traumas from your childhood, or memories that can harm you in terms of your emotions. So if you have a therapist, that would be great, because then you can tap into this energy and recall almost what went through with this child, or what they're asking for you to pay attention to. Or maybe you tap into this just to listen as to what is your connection with this part right now in your life. Is this part prominent in your life? Do you respond the same way like you did as a 10-year-old, as a whatever year old child? Or have you learned and progressed out of some of those behaviors? Or if you do also see that you still react like you did in your environment with your parents that maybe were abusive, or they were this or that, and how can you change that? How can you adapt a grown part of you to be more in charge of running your lives. And again, work very gently with the wounded child, because it was a big part of you, and it's a very delicate, because it had to deal with a lot of things, really. Okay. Working with this part, I think this is fun, and also it's, like I said, it's very much forgotten in the healing spaces, really, because as much as we need to focus on our wounded child, that is very true. We need to kind of send the energy there for healing. We need to be able to go there, but we can't stay there. It's not fruitful. But also, here is where we can prosper. This is where our creative forces can actually come in, right? Our playful side. The part of us that is playful, that is childlike, that would have been a child if all environment was allowing. And if this part of you was already your childhood or how you grew up, tapping into it as an adult can also seem a bit like, you have to be adult now. You shouldn't tap into the child energy. But again, tapping in here is where you bring in your creative forces, listening into and taking that energy into your day and incorporating this part of you. And again, sitting with this as a representation of that part, whatever that object is. It can be a crystal, it can be anything, Lego or whatever. But sitting with this and feeling into that part of you. Maybe you remember back then in that age when you were fully in that childlike energy and life felt so beautiful and so magical. Like, what was coming for you, and tap into that. We all have that, even if maybe you had just a little bit of that. But there were moments where this part came through and poke through. And if you really can't figure out and you think there was really no moments where that part of me came through, you can try and bring that up right now. And by sitting with that, to listen deep enough to that inner child in the, not in the shadow, not as a wounded child, but in this state, and hear what they have to say to you. You don't know. When we work in this kind of phenomenological way or in this spiritual perspective, our inner parts can communicate with us in a very vast way. It can come through dreams, or you can really feel it when you're holding that part and you're connecting with it. However, the part connect, you must be open to receive those communications and those guidance of how you can incorporate them in your life. And just to touch on this before I go, is our inner child is literally the one inner part that is so closely connected to our ancestral wound, because how our part became, it was responding to our environment which was created by our parent or our community, which was influenced by a lot of things, and mostly their parents, right? And their parents were influenced by their parents. So it is like a generational it's a map of what has been happening in your family. You really have to look into your childhood to see where is my family? Is the love flowing or not? And that will just show you clearly if there's stagnant of love. And that's where we can start doing the ancestral healing, by literally starting to heal ourselves, so that when we move forward in the next generation, we provide an environment for our children or our creative project in a way that is filled with love, and love flows, right? So that's a little thing to look out for, to be cautious. And before you place any judgment, like, you guys should have done this for me as a child or whatever, just be aware that they were also dished their childhood, and they unfortunately dish you what they were dished. And when you work on yourself, you are trying to kind of clear the cup so that you can dish something different. That's the plan, at least. And that's where I'm going to leave it today, with our short inner part, or the child In a part, I just wanted to bring in these two aspects, that everything has a shadow and we don't have to always focus on the wounded child. Let's start celebrating and focusing on that playful child, the creative child, the one that brings us all the fun of life. Thank you so much for staying tuned, and till we see each other on the next episode.